most people in the congregation refer to me as. I'm married, have two daughters, 9 and 6, and we have been a part of the congregation that we pastor now for a little over 13 years. Actually, the the first pastoral role that I was in, and I would be delighted if it's the last church that we pastor. Hopefully not too soon, but yeah. And so this church was started in 1991, went through some ups and downs. About 15 years ago, it closed completely. And then a group of professors from Evangel University, which is just about 7 blocks down the road, started a project to revitalize this church. It's much more like a church plant because the doors were closed and the previous congregation had all dispersed. Um, but my wife and I joined that project about 8 months in, and then we've been here ever since. And it really is a delight. We are so thankful to have landed here. What at the time seemed like a coincidental landing, but looking back, I really do believe it was a providential landing spot for our family. Anything else you want me to share about myself, or do you want me to get right into it? I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mark.
I think if there's anything else you'd like to share, please feel free to do so. But if not, go ahead and move into our topic today.
Okay, great. Um, Again, it's a joy and honor to be with you today to share a little bit about my journey with the church calendar, but also how I see that it has helped the congregation that I lead, how it has helped me personally in my spiritual formation. And then more broadly speaking, the role that sacred time or sacred rhythms might play in our spiritual formation, both as individuals, but as church communities. But before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of the church calendar and then focus a little more explicitly on the next season we will be entering as the church, which is Advent, before we get into that with any degree of specificity, I actually want to set the stage just a little bit by considering the question or approaching the question about the value of sacred time. We're talking about sacred rhythm. So, the value of sacred time, both from a practical and a theological perspective. So, first, what is sacred time and why might it play a significant role in our formation into the image of Christ? In 1992, the Christian hip hop trio DC Talk sang the famous lyrics, "Time is ticking away, tick, tick, ticking away." If you know the song, you're probably singing the next line in your head, tick tock, tickety tock. Maybe only Gen Zers and elder millennials are familiar with that song, but I do believe it's true. Time is ticking away. Um, it's like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps going. We have just uh, ended Halloween a couple of weeks ago, and mark my word, we will blink and it will be Easter 2025. Time is relentless in its progress. Just keeps going. Not only does it keep moving along, but in my experience, it seems to do so with what seems to be increasing velocity. I turned 40 years old this year, so I know this from personal experience that the older you get, the quicker time seems to fly by. But does that matter? That's the question I have wrestled with. Who cares? That's just a part of life. And does it matter that time is relentless in its progress? I mean, it just seems like a rather arbitrary, dare I say, meaningless feature of the world we live in, at least on a surface level observation. So, what is time? I mean, time can be understood in a variety of ways. If we want to think about a dictionary definition of time, it might be understood as the continued sequence of existence and events in an irreversible fashion. Or we might think of it simply as the movement, our movement through space. So we can think of this in simple scientific terms. I'm not an astronomer, but I do at least know that a day is a rotation of the Earth on its axis, and a month is a revolution of the moon around the Earth, and a year is the revolution of the Earth around the sun. So if we think about it in those terms, I mean, time does seem rather meaningless, devoid of any inherent significance. The progression of time is just a brute, inconsequential fact. It's a law of nature that has governed the universe for millions of years, but nothing more than that. What I want to encourage us to think about today, to push back against that assumption and to actually consider, well, could it be more? Is it possible for time to be redeemed, to, as people of faith, to allow our hearts to be opened to the reality of something like sacred time, where we begin to see every moment of every day as something more than an arbitrary ticking of the clock. So can time itself be redeemed? And probably this comes as no surprise, but I think our scriptures from beginning to end teach that yes, time is in fact sacred. So I acknowledge in my experience, it can be a great struggle to not allow the days of our years to just bleed together into indistinguishable nothingness. I want to take a moment to consider why. And I think this is important in the conversation, especially as we move on to consider the value of a season like Advent in our spiritual formation. Why is it so easy for us to allow the all of our days to bleed together into indistinguishable nothingness? Why do we tend to have a difficult time seeing every day, every moment as a holy moment in which we might have our eyes opened to the reality of Christ's presence with us and his work in us? I think first, perhaps this tendency springs from simple distraction. That there is always a new piece of information to consume, a new piece of information to digest. There's always breaking news or world-altering historic events that are constantly bursting into our consciousness, unexpected with tsunami-like force. And then all of those events, even the most serious ones, are quickly pushed out of mind and forgotten, sometimes even within hours because something bigger has occurred. That there's just far too much input for us not to be distracted, I think. So this moment in time can seem fleeting and unimportant because of the grandeur of the next moment. Andy Warhol once predicted that in the future, everybody will be world famous for 15 minutes, which is a wild prediction in light of today's viral TikTok video reality. Uh, Often a swift rise in fame is matched only by the speed at which our minds move on to the next thing. We are simply put a distracted people. We are also, understandably, a busy people. The 20th century Trappist monk Thomas Merton suggested that the biggest disease in North America is busyness. And in my experience, that has been true. So we are distracted, we are busy. Of course, the two often go hand in hand, but how can we see the beauty of this moment, the spiritual significance of this moment in the midst of hurry, distraction, and busyness? Well, I don't know that we can. I think in order to see the significance of this moment, we have to resist busyness, distraction, and hurry. In fact, this is the advice Dallas Willard famously offered. He said, "We should take as our aim to live our lives entirely without hurry, and joy and strength, which God intended for human life, the well-being and health of mind and body is inconsistent with living in a hurry. I think there is a lot of wisdom in that. And I think part of what makes something like the church calendar not only beautiful, but really spiritually enriching, is that it helps us resist those cultural pulls. Hurry makes it impossible to nurture the spiritual life. It makes it all but impossible to sacredness of this moment for what it is because I'm preoccupied with what must be done next. Of course, I don't think Willard is encouraging lethargy or laziness or apathy. I don't even think hurry itself is sinful. In fact, there are situations where to not hurry would be irresponsible and maybe even dangerous. I can think of 1,000 scenarios in which that might be the case. One simple example, if my 6-year-old is wandering out into a busy street, hurry on both her part and mine is the most appropriate thing in that moment. Um, but maybe hurry is not needed or even good in every instance. When everything is an emergency, nothing is an emergency. So the question that I have to wrestle with is that constant frenetic pace, is that forming me in ways that are not healthy? And I think it is. This is something that I have to actively wrestle against. And perhaps a simple recognition that time is sacred would be one of the most important keys in helping us resist that cultural pull. Where we learn to resist elevating every task that needs completion to sort of urgent status. But I can't take a moment to slow down and recognize the holiness of this moment because I really have to send that email and I have to do it right now. I have to check the news and make sure that I'm not missing some important breaking news. I have important stuff that has to be accomplished and I need to get it done now. So my schedule simply won't allow me to slow down. I wonder if at times our schedules are so packed and overloaded that there is simply no margin, that there is not a single spare moment in which we can become consciously aware of the sacredness of that moment. And I want to suggest that our scriptures offer us a different model, one that is not ruled by our schedules, but rather where we have instead, through intentionality, allowed our schedules to become tools for us, to allow our schedules to become opportunities for us to really slow time down in a way, to slow time down and to see this moment as an opportunity to see and know God. Annie Dillard once said that a schedule defends from chaos and whim. And then I love this line. She said, it is a net for catching days. Schedule is a net for catching days. So think of that in the midst of our busyness and overwhelmed scheduling and very little margin. I think the rhythms of the church calendar can serve a similar function. And that they become a net for us to catch our days. We slow time down. But I also think that is only true if we have intentionally sought to eliminate chaos and whim from the process of scheduling. But scheduling alone is not enough. It's insufficient because we can still fill our schedules on a whim. We can still knowingly place chaos into the structure of our days. But if we approach our schedules with some intentionality, and I think the church calendar helps us as people of faith do exactly that, I think it becomes for us this net of catching days where the day is not just an inconsequential ticking of the clock, but it becomes for us an opportunity to be reminded of God's presence that is available to us now. So that's sort of the practical perspective. Now, I want to spend just a few minutes approaching this from a different angle, from through a theological lens. Uh, it, are we good on time with that, Mark? Can we go ahead and deal with the theological perspective?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I just want to, I'm going to quickly run through several Psalms um, because I think we find this language of the importance of a single day subtly hinted at throughout our Psalms. So here's one simple example. Now, on the surface, it seems insignificant, but I think when you see the cumulative effect of all of these Psalms taken in concert together, I think we find something really helpful. So, which I think there's this subtle hint at the holy significance of a single day there in verse 15. Blessed are the people who know the festal shout, who walk, O Lord, in the light of your face, who exult in your name all the day. Again, this seems like a really inconsequential statement, but it seems, and I think this will become clear as we continue to work through a few Psalms, but it seems in the poetic imagination of the lyricists who wrote the Psalms, it seems that the spiritual significance of a single day cannot be overlooked, principally because this moment is an opportunity for us to exalt in the name of the Lord. And any opportunity to dwell with or to commune with or to be opened up to the reality of God's presence is an opportunity for us to live into our purpose more fully. Here's another example, Psalm 118. Well-known declaration, I'm sure many are familiar with it in verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So the poets who penned the Psalms seem to have this unshakable confidence that a day, however fleeting it may seem, is a significant spiritual opportunity, and it's one that must be seized and embraced and entered into with open hearts and eyes. And then one more, perhaps this is nowhere more evident than in this Psalm, Psalm 84. And I'm sorry if bringing this one up gives some of you flashbacks to youth group karaoke time led by Matt Redman, but we're going to go there anyway. Psalm 84, that opening line probably brings that song to your minds. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of the Lord. And then if you jump down to verse 10, for a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. The place of your presence is rich and life-giving, and I yearn for it. A single day that is spent there with an awareness of your presence is better than 1,000 days that I could spend anywhere else. So I think one of the things that we find if we look at this repeated theme throughout the Psalms is that time is not meaningless. Quite the contrary, a day is a moment to redeem, a moment for us to be restored and renewed in the presence of our God. So, as followers of Jesus, we want to see time. We want to see the hours of our days and the days of our years as the true gift from God that they are. The Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar once wrote that in the world of redemption, nothing pertaining to the world of creation is disowned. In the world of redemption, nothing pertaining to the world of creation is disowned. And while this is, he's not talking about sacred time or the importance of redeeming time, but I wonder, though that's not his point of reference, I wonder if there's truth in this statement that might also apply to the importance of redeeming time and allowing allowing the hours of our days to carry the spiritual significance that they always have. And I think this is baked into the grand narrative that our scriptures are telling from the very beginning. Genesis 1, our scriptures open with the creation story. And I think even here, the opening words of our scripture, I think we find hints that point us to the nature of time and the fact that it is indeed sacred. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. God separated light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening, and there was morning the first day. Now, I understand that this all seems incredibly elementary, but I think it's actually important for understanding the significance of the church calendar. So our Bible opens with this poetic, theologically oriented description of creation. And while there's so much in that chapter that we could consider, one subtle nuance is, again, what seems like just a brute fact, an inconsequential law of nature, a circumstantial reality, is actually an important part of God's design. And if it's a part of God's design, there must be something to that. So God creates light, we have night and day. So Genesis is telling the story of creation in the framework of this passing of days. So God creates, and that activity is divided into these 6 day periods. And then on the seventh day, of course, that creative activity ceases and God rests. And of course, God is resting not as though God is tired from a tough day of manual labor in the heat of July, and he's in need of replenishing his body with electrolytes. So grab the Gatorade or something like that. No, this day of rest marks the completion of that creative activity where he enters a time of ruling with his creation. And if you notice in the seventh day of that creative activity, there is no end to that day. So every description of each period of creative activity, days 1 through 6, concludes in the same way. There was evening and there was morning on the first, second, third, fourth day, so on and so forth, but not on the seventh day. God blesses the seventh day, makes it holy, and it becomes for the people a model of how they are to live their lives, how they are to approach their work. They work and they work and they work, but built into the rhythm of their work throughout their lives is this rhythm of rest. And that rhythm of rest, if it is overlooked, it actually leads them into some destructive habits. But this rhythm of rest, this opportunity to delight in their lives with God, is essential in their formation as God's people. In fact, all of their work actually flows out of that day of rest and delight. So again, we see the spiritual significance of a single day in that light. Built into the week is this rhythm of rest where we are setting aside time to see and know God. Um, I want to bring up one additional point in Genesis chapter 1. If you jump down to 14, God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the night from the day, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." We won't read the rest of that text, but again, verse 14, the insistence is that these lights in the expanse that are separating day and night, these the lights that are creating these days actually have purpose in the story. The author of Genesis says they are for signs, that they are for seasons, they're for days and for years, but each of those days is a part of a season for God's people, and those seasons make up the years, and all of that is a significant opportunity for the people of God to retell the story that they are a part of and to embody that story and to allow that story to shape them. Because if they would embrace these rhythms of time by retelling the story in a structured way every year, they would, in so doing, allow their lives to then be shaped by that story that they are a part of. a reminder that we are a part of a bigger story. Um, Tim Mackey of the Bible Project put it this way, commenting on this detail in the creation narrative. He said another layer of of Genesis is that the first, middle, and last days are all designed to show God creating structures of time. In the timing of the middle fourth day, God appoints the sun, moon, and stars to rule over day and night, and they are to mark the Moedim, the annual sacred feasts. So I hope that this is beginning to come together and make sense. I hope I'm not belaboring this point, but I actually think it's really important. Mackey argues that the whole sacred calendar of Israel, what we find detailed later in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, is actually already a part of the story. It's baked into the story here from the beginning in Genesis. So, this, I think, is a helpful way of understanding sacred time. Sacred time was an important part of life for the people of God from the beginning. And I think what I want to propose today is that that remains to be the case for the church. Entering the story that we are a part of, entering these rhythms in a routine way, reminds us as well, just as it did for Israel, it reminds us too that we are a part of a bigger story. So, this is one of the reasons that in my personal life, why I follow the church calendar in my devotional life, it's one of the reasons our congregation follows the church calendar. We want to try to understand even something as ordinary and as commonplace as the passage of time. We want to understand that through the lens of our life with Jesus Christ. We want to remind ourselves every week, every day throughout the year that we are a part of a bigger story. We're a part of a different story, a story that supersedes the cultural or the national story that we're a part of, a story that supersedes even the familial stories that we are a part of. In his little book, which is on Advent called The Anticipated Christ, Brian Zahnd wrote something that I think is helpful in this conversation. He said, in modernity, the speed of life becomes ever faster and more frenetic. And this contributes to a shallowness of soul that we experience as disenchantment. He goes on to say this: the sacred calendar, on the other hand, comes from a slower and more contemplative time. And I think entering into the story in this from this contemplative framework opens us up to tapping into the possibilities when our minds are opened up to an awareness of the presence of God. So we want to mark even the passing of time in a thoughtful way that is centered around the person of Jesus Christ. This great story of creation, incarnation, death, resurrection, and an awareness of the age to come, so that we might allow the small, inconsequential moments of our ordinary, everyday lives to open us up to extraordinary encounters with God. I once heard one pastor put it this way, and I can't remember where I heard it, and I can't find it. You would think I'd be able to find it on the internet, but I can't find the source of this, but it has stuck with me. They said, until you see your day as sacred, and we might add to that your year, until you see your day or your year as sacred, your schedule will rule you. So I want to suggest that we must approach our hours and our days intentionally, building in margin, the margin that is needed to cultivate an awareness of God's presence. How might we begin to see our days as sacred and avoid allowing our schedules to rule us? Um, and to instead see our schedules as a tool that can habituate us to God's presence and our purpose, our place in God's story as we see every moment as sacred. And I think this is the beauty of the liturgical calendar. One more note on this before we move on. I attended a conference a couple of months ago, and one of the presenters at that conference was the English poet Malcolm Guite. I once heard Malcolm Guite talking about the importance of understanding or the importance of redeeming time, the importance of sacred time and how we interact with that, and the important role that can play in our spiritual development. And he talked about the distinction between chronos and kairos, the two Greek words for time, one that is understood just as a, the brute fact, the passage of time, the ticking of the clock. The second one, a time that is a little more robust, a little fuller. So whereas one is thin and flat, it's just natural necessity. It's built into the way our world functions. The other is much more rich and deep, and it's an understanding of time as a moment of challenge and judgment and choice, and to experience time in a way that has eternal significance. He illustrated it with this image, and then we'll move on. He said this: a moment of in loveness contains more than half an hour of box ticking and form filling. The split second of a prayer in the mind of a soldier falling to the ground might contain more real and significant time than all the rest of his life. And then he went on to say this: liturgical time is a happy survival into the modern world of that earlier way of understanding, and the liturgical seasons, the liturgical division of the day itself into times of prayer, is designed to give us more access in the midst of chronos to those kairos moments. So, why follow the church calendar? Well, first, we believe that Jesus, the story of Jesus, has radically changed our very lives at a fundamental level. We are now a new people. We are in a new story. And this change is so significant that it has altered even the way in which we go about telling time. And so we want to intentionally ground ourselves in this all-encompassing story. And we want to intentionally um, root our minds in that story. So uh, I think the first reminder that following the church calendar provides for us is that we are a part of a different story, and that we are a part of a much bigger church. We're a part of a global historic church. I once heard somebody put it this way, that we need the whole church. We need the church in its historical length and in its ecumenical breadth. We need the history. So we need what the church fathers and the church mothers, the wisdom that the tradition um, offers us. What we have inherited, the faith that we are a part of, it has been passed down to us. We need what the early church offers us, and we need the church in its ecumenical breadth, what the various traditions active today around our world. That that there is something for me personally so powerful, and I don't know, maybe this is just the mystic in me. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, Mark, but although in the 70s, Karl Rahner said that the Christian of the future is going to be a mystic or will be nothing at all. And I think there's something to be said of that. But anyway, there's something powerful to me um, to know that Christians around the world in many languages are going to be reading or hearing the same texts from our scriptures that I am hearing or reading on a particular Sunday. They may be even praying the same prayers that our congregation is praying. I even see this in my immediate context on Sundays as I'm driving to our church building and I pass a neighboring church every Sunday, just a few blocks from our building, and they list the texts that their sermon is going to be based in on that Sunday. And often it's the same text that we are exploring. And it seems so silly and simple, but every week it is a reminder as I pass that church that is a part of a different tradition, but I am reminded those are my brothers and sisters there, a part of the same faith, a part of the same church, worshiping the same Lord. And I think the church calendar um, can be a really important reminder of that. You know, in the Apostles' Creed, we affirm our belief in the holy universal church. The fact that the church that I am a part of is a tiny piece of the whole. We are a part of a much bigger universal church. We're not an unimportant part of that whole. We're not a meaningless part. We're a tiny part, but we're an important part. But we are a part of a much bigger, a beautiful body. It is not just about us. And I think that is something that every church must consistently remind themselves of, that we're a part of a bigger whole. Even the largest churches among us, a tiny part of a much bigger body. Um, so yeah, I think now maybe we'll move on to some practical considerations. But before we do, Mark, are there any questions or anything you want me to direct my focus to at this point? I don't want to
I'd
belabor
like
that
to touch
point.
on a couple items in the chatbots that have come. Nathan Davis writes, many cultures of the ancient church measure time from event to event instead of by days. As I age, I now try to focus on the events in my life more than the North American calendar. The events in my development are important, not the days. And I can empathize with that, Nathan. It's a very wise word. I think it's interesting too, because we're very much in the West in a time culture, a chronos culture,
Yeah.
to your point, Matt. But then the events really drive us to more of a kairos type of perception and even driving it into becoming a culture or a way of life for us. So that's a very insightful comment that Nathan's brought to us. And I would wholeheartedly agree. And then Jonathan Hollingsworth has a question. And he says, and you may address this, Matt, in what you're going to be saying next, but he says, I want to make sure we get to it. How does the church calendar implemented into daily life look for you? What makes it a marked church calendar day versus a normal, flattened, secularized day or week?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Malcolm Guite points to the fact that we are walking through various liturgical seasons on the church calendar, and we're reminded of that on Sundays. One way to implement some of that structure into a day is understanding, I think his language, and I think that slide is still on the screen, the liturgical division of the day itself into different times of prayer. So for me, that has been one helpful exercise. And then those daily liturgical divisions, I am still grounding myself in whatever the particular season that the church happens to be in that moment. So the texts that I am reading are texts assigned for that particular season. The prayers, so the collect for the week, the prayers that I am saying are often connected to the season of the church. So I think it's um, and for those who may come from traditions or backgrounds that are not liturgical at all, that this might require some extra legwork. The congregation that I am a pastor at is what we are a part of the Assemblies of God. So we're a part of a tradition that historically has not, by and large, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but by and large has not followed the church calendar. And so many folks in our congregation, this is new material. In fact, that's my story. I was raised in the Assemblies of God. Um, so this is new for me in the past 15 years or so. And I would say that it is a slow journey. I am still, I'm not at all in any way, shape, or form an expert when it comes to the church calendar or leading a church through the church calendar. That this is very much still exploration for me. I am continuing to discover some of the richness and beauty of this resource that is a tremendous help for the church. But one like incredibly subtle and maybe seemingly insignificant way that we as a congregation try to keep these rhythms of the church calendar in the consciousness of the members in our congregation is with the simple use of a liturgical banner. And all it is the color of that season. So each season has a color assigned to it. And so we have a banner in our sanctuary at the front opposite our cross, and it's just a banner with the church calendar so that even visually, every week when we walk into the sanctuary, I am reminded, oh, this is the season. I am resisting the cultural stories. I'm reminding myself that I am a part of a bigger story, the story of the redemption of the world, the story of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So I don't know if that's helpful or if that is getting to the point of the question he raised. If not, I'm happy to try to address it in a different way.
Jonathan, is there anything else you'd like to add to that to clarify?
Oh no, I was just typing. That was great. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your question.
Um, so we can continue to move on, and Mark, please feel free to interrupt me. I need to look at the time and see because we do want to get into Advent. Um, so the the church calendar as we have it now developed over time, but fairly early the basic structure of the church calendar that we have now, by the fourth century anyway, what we have now, the shell of it was there. So again, this emerged from Hebrew spirituality, rooted in the liturgical calendar of Jewish spirituality, but then it was sort of a recentering around the person of Jesus Christ. And so early Christians were very early on celebrating an extended period of celebrating the resurrection through the Easter season, Lent leading up to that, a season of preparation so that we might more fully enter into the real celebration and joy of the resurrection. And in some ways, the season of Advent serves a similar function. So Advent is actually the beginning of the liturgical year. Um, and it's a bit different than how we culturally begin New Year's. Culturally, we begin New Year's with fireworks and parties and toasts, and it's a big to-do and a lot of celebration. Advent grounds the people of God again in an alternative, countercultural story. So we are, for 4 weeks prior to Christmas, we are intentionally entering into the angst that the people of Israel experienced as they awaited their coming Messiah. Advent comes from a Latin word that simply means arrival. Um, and so that's what it's about. It's entering into Israel's story. So in a way, during Advent, we are reenacting the story of Israel waiting for the Messiah, but we actually also have our own waiting to enter into. This is not just a historical fact that we are looking back to and considering, but we are reminding ourselves that God's people in every age are a people who wait. I can pull up a couple of scriptures that might help us think about this. So again, this language of waiting is deeply embedded in the poetic imagination of those who wrote the Psalms. Um, lem- I'm sorry. I was going to go to another text in First Corinthians. I think we'll get there later. Um, But in First Corinthians, Paul in chapter 1 grounds his entire letter to the church in Corinth, addressing it to those who wait for the revealing of their Lord and Savior. So there's this insistence throughout our scriptures that God's people are a people who are waiting, and we will be until the return of Christ. And if that's the case, we must become comfortable with waiting. Karl Barth, I have that quote on the slide, said, "What other time or season can or will the church have but that of Advent?" We are a people who wait. And so, one of the benefits of a season like Advent is that it forces us to resist the immediacy of our culture where I can get anything I want. I can have it delivered to my house, not 2-day Amazon. I can have it delivered now, same day shipping. I can get an answer to any question I want by asking Google or Siri or now Chat GPT. Advent helps form us where our culture is trying to move us away from patience and tries to teach us that no, we don't have to wait for anything. Advent grounds us in this reality that God's people will always be a people who are waiting, and we must learn to do that well. We must learn to wait faithfully, um, and resist the culture of now, to resist the culture of instant gratification. So I think in that light, Advent serves a critical role in our spiritual formation, especially as products of the modern world. It forces us to slow down. It also helps us to give voice to the breadth of human experience. So we don't want to rush past the angst and the longing and the anticipation. We want to enter into that. Advent is a recognition on the part of the church that all is not right. All is not as it should be. We are awaiting the age to come when every tear will be wiped from our eyes, but that's not the case today. We may still have tears streaming down our faces. And we want to give voice to that. We want to make room. And I think even in the context of a congregational worship, um, I want, I hope to create an environment where we don't always have to rush past the heartache or the angst or the sorrow, but sometimes we just sit with the dissonance. We allow ourselves to give voice to that. And what I think that does for us, the benefit that I think it has ultimately is it enables us to really enter into the joy of the Christmas season. By the way, Christmas on the church calendar is not a single day. It's a season. It's a 12-day feast. You know the song, the 12 days of Christmas. Um, it is an extended, prolonged season of joy and celebration in the reality of God with us. And I think one of the reasons that I'll jump here to the end. Ronald Rollheiser said that our society knows how to anticipate an event, but not how to sustain it. Um, and I think that's true. And I think grounding ourselves in the church calendar again helps us learn how to sustain joy and celebration for more than a single day during which we have a family gathering and are opening presents. But if we have walked through 4 weeks of angst and 4 weeks of longing and expressing the fact that all is not right, all is not as it should be, when we get to Christmas, I think we want some prolonged celebration because Advent is long and it's dark. It in the northern hemisphere, it actually beautifully coincides with the darkest time of year where the sun is setting before 5 p.m. So there's even that reminder in the world around us. And so I think by the time we get to Christmas, there is this desire to really embrace the joy and celebration of the season. Any other questions about that, Mark?
I love what you're saying. As you've been talking, I've just been thinking about this point that Ronald Rolheiser just brings out so clearly. And in our culture in the West, and we have some people on that live in Europe and have served in Europe, and I wonder if it's the same there. I think the church calendar has more influence, even in a secularized society, more than it does here. But the whole idea of we know how to anticipate an event, and then once it's over, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
And then really the 12 days of Christmas are after the event of Christmas Day. We had a friend of ours in Chicago. She shows her love by buying things. And so she bought us 12 days of Christmas jams. So my wife
Mm.
and I thought about it. They looked delicious, and the temptation was to open them sooner than later. But we're going to pace them out over the 12 days following Christmas Day and enjoy them day by day and split them. There was enough for like two people. But the point is to continue on with the excitement. I know that my wife has shared with me growing up as a missionary kid in the Dominican Republic. The big parties happened after Christmas Day. The 12 days of Christmas were celebrated in the Dominican Republic. So, and that's when the presents came. You
Yeah.
know, it came after the day of Christmas morning and so forth. So I love what you're saying, and I think it's such a countercultural thought. But what that adds to our life spiritually, to Jonathan's question, is so profound. I mean, it gets us ready. I kept thinking, you know, and as a male, I can only identify this with watching Linda go through three pregnancies and that anticipation of the day the baby's born. But then it isn't just the birth date that's the exciting time. It's the celebration of having the baby in the home after that.
Yeah.
And the joy that comes with that, and the holding and the feeding, all that comes with the celebration of this human coming into the world. Um, you know, what you said is so profound today. I'd like to present it to those that are on. Anybody else have a question or a thought that you would like to add to this discussion? Nathan, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself. And if you would like to add something, please unmute yourself and share. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I was thinking as Matt was talking about personality research. One of the five factors of personality is conscientiousness, which is marked by those who love organization. Those who love organization are going to be drawn to the organization provided by the Christian calendar. Those who don't like organization, and you know, many of our forefathers in our particular movement were not scientists, and that did not were not really highly educated, so they weren't marked by organization. But many people in our movement now are marked by a love and appreciation for organization, and are going to thrive when they see a calendar that provides that organization. And they're going to walk in and they're going to say, I belong here because this is who I am. And they appreciate that organization that's provided by the Christian calendar. The second thing that comes to mind is that the calendar not only provides organization, but as we move through the calendar, it's constantly changing, and that provides something different to reflect on each week. And so I'm led in reflective exercise. I'm not just a dumbbell sitting there in a church pew, but my pastor is leading me through a constantly reflecting exercise that's different and changing each week that I can grow from. Not everyone likes reflection, but those like me who do enjoy organization and reflection, when they walk into a church like this, are going to say, this is where I belong. And I deserve that too. I deserve to have a church like that, just like other people who may not like that want to choose a different kind of church. I deserve to have a church where I feel comfortable. God has made me with this kind of personality, and many people like me. We deserve a place where we feel at home, we feel like we belong. And when we walk into a church like this, it's not for everyone, but for those of us who have this personality, we'll instantly relate and say, I belong here.
Yeah. I think
Excellent.
you bring up some really helpful points. Again, the idea that the calendar, the various seasons are giving voice to the breadth of human experience. One way we see that is actually the season that we are currently in, right before the beginning of a new year Advent, which is called, and it's, by the way, the longest season on the church calendar and the most boring because it's not tracking with a part of the redemption story explicitly or the life of Jesus, but it's the story, or it's the season of ordinary time, which is the creativity that went into naming that season, or it's also called the season after Pentecost. But I think this is another reminder, maybe especially for Pentecostals like myself, where there's always this emphasis on the grand spiritual experience and chasing that mountaintop experience and the spiritual high. Ordinary time is a reminder that not all of life is extraordinary. Some of it is just another day. There's another thought, and again, this is another idea that I can't remember who said it, but it's helpful. I like, they said, I like ordinary time. We don't need to try and spice it up with other names or make it seem less ordinary. Every season of life isn't extraordinary, and every day isn't exceptional, but ordinary days are still Christ's. Um, uh,
Mm.
Tish Harrison Warren, the Anglican priest who wrote a book called Liturgy of the Ordinary, said everyone wants a revolution. No one wants to do the dishes. But there is something important even in the ordinary. And so the church calendar reminds us of that. Thanks for bringing that point up, Nathan. That's really helpful.
Anybody else
Um,
have any questions or comments?
one other thing, Mark, if I could,
Certainly.
um, back to the question that Jonathan asked earlier in connection specifically with the Advent season, and Mark, you addressed this with the Christmas season with your 12 different jams, which I love that. It's just such a practical way to remind your family that we're a part of a bigger story. And there are other practices connected to Advent, probably most notably the Advent wreath. So the congregation might participate in that ritual, an individual family might participate in that ritual, but essentially the wreath has five candles, one for each week of Advent, and then the center candle, the Christ candle, which is lit on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. But each week you're lighting one additional candle. And there's this visual element where I am visually reminded, and our daughters are reminded of this fact, um, that we are waiting for something. And there's this growing sense of anticipation as we light one additional candle. And so it's reminding us that we are to be a people who are comfortable waiting. We are to be a patient people. We are to be a contemplative people. Another one that is actually quite popular culturally would be the Advent calendar, um, where that too is the purpose of that is to build this sense of expectation and anticipation, reminding us that we're not quite there yet. So we're pumping the brakes a little bit on celebration. We're holding off, and we're entering into this season of waiting. So Mark, as you were sharing that about your jams, I wanted to circle back to some of those really practical rituals that we can enter into as congregations or individually to help nurture an awareness.
Yes. And something I'd like to add is there are some wonderful guides out there for us to participate in. And again, to go back to Jonathan's questions, how do we take the church calendar that begins at Advent, which is usually sometimes falling on the last Sunday of November or the first Sunday of December. And then to weave those into our lives as a yearly practice, going through Advent and then into Lent, and then, as you said, concluding with Pentecost and entering into ordinary time. And how can we weave those into our lives where we are actually doing something that's a part of the majority church in the world today? And I absolutely love what you said. We need the church in its historic depth and its ecumenical breadth. And as you mentioned, you're a Pentecostal, so am I. So are probably most of the people watching this webinar or who will watch it, because many watch it after the fact. But we are part of a wider body of believers that we can celebrate and participate with. And I especially found that out when I went as a missionary to Pakistan. I really discovered the church calendar because we had no church to attend except the Church of Pakistan, which followed the church calendar. And when we would say the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed each week, and then we went through and followed all the aspects of the church calendar and even celebrated communion every Sunday, I began to think to myself, where has this been all of my life? Because I found it to be so refreshing. And I began to weave it as a missionary into my personal life. To Jonathan's point, I bet Jonathan didn't realize your question was so profound, but it really is. But I just like to share a few things. And Matt, I'd like you to think about also some things that you like to add as we are winding our time together, just some practical dynamics of how we can weave this into the church calendar. There are several guides that I've used that follow the church calendar that are very helpful. One is a book called A Guide to Prayer. It's an Abington Press book. And the authors of this guide are Reuben Job and Norman Shafchuk. It looks like it says Shawchuk, but I was told one time that it's actually pronounced Shafchuk. But A Guide to Prayer, and it's published by Upper Room. And for each week, there's a liturgy that's set up beginning on the first, leading into Advent, into the first Sunday of the church calendar. And it has an invocation, a psalm, a daily reading. There are readings in it for reflection from different authors, and I've discovered many different authors through the different quotes that are given here. There are prayers for the church, for others, for myself. There's a time for reflection that is both in silence, which I enjoy practicing, contemplative prayer, and then written, which I love to do then, of course, when I journal, because I do journal. And then there's a hymn. And some of the hymns I've never, ever heard before. But here's the wonderful thing about YouTube. You can type in the name of that hymn, and I've had maybe only one time where a hymn has not come up, where you hear the music and the lyrics, and together it's a powerful way to be connected to the church in its historic depth and its ecumenical breadth. And then there's a benediction, and then you do that each day, and then this just takes you through. And so Upper Room, A Guide to Prayer. And there's another one called A Guide to Prayer for All Who Seek God. And again, it's the same publisher and the same authors. I've used in studies for the church year is another good one called Watch for the Light, Readings for Advent and Christmas. So it takes me through that time. And then there's another, but published by the same company, Plow, called Bread and Wine, Readings for Lent and for Easter. And so for my personal dynamic, to follow Jonathan's question with the church calendar, these are the things that I picked up to just form myself spiritually. And again, becoming part of that historic depth and that ecumenical breadth that brings such dynamic in spiritual formation and in life.
Yeah, I have also used a variety of resources. I mean, there are so many great resources available. Stanley Hauerwas has a little devotional that walks you through the season of Lent called the Cross Shattered Christ. Um, Brian Zond has one. There's also a series of books that has been really helpful. It's called The Fullness of Time, and each so it walk that there's a one volume for each season. So there's 6 volumes. They're really short. And each volume is a different author. One is by Esau McCauley, one's by Tish Harrison Warren, one is by Emilio Alvarez, another Pentecostal. Um, I forget. Oh, I think one is by Fleming Rutledge, as well. And who is Fleming Rutledge also has a lot of helpful resources when it comes to the church calendar. She is just a deep well of wisdom.
Well, as our time is winding down, I would like to just put this out to Matt as well as an assignment for me. Perhaps, Matt, we can put together bibliography in the next week and have it ready for folks to be able to draw from if they would like to choose from something or explore different books that will help them enter into the new church year, beginning with Advent, and then how it progresses throughout the church year into the following Advent. We can do that together, and then we can post it on our I Am Wholeness website, Institute for Ministerial Wholeness website, and which is where everybody registered, and there we can go to that, they can find it and draw from that. So perhaps we can do that together.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'd like to conclude our time because your time is valuable, but just want to say that we have a part two to this, which we are going to have coming up on December the 5th, which is a Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. And in this particular time, we are going to be looking at part two, which is going to be Holy Rhythms. And we're going to be looking at spiritual formation practices for 2025. So, what are some things perhaps that are tried and true that you practice in your spiritual formation that are helpful to you? But then we also want to get into some other practices that are biblical and that are rooted in the ancient church that you can introduce into your spiritual formation practices as you go into a new year and to accentuate the church calendar that perhaps you'll be following as you go into 2025. And so, again, Matt will be back with us. We're very excited about this. This has just been an excellent presentation today. And so we want to do part two, which will put more practicality and practice to your spiritual formation going into this new year. I would like to add that we are going to be able to do another series on spiritual abuse, which we did last January. We had a 5-part series last January, excuse me, a 4-part series last January. This year, and during Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month, which ironically is January, we're going to be doing a 3-part series. And psychologist Nathan Davis, who's on with us today, is going to be a part of that with his wife, counselor Dr. Beth Davis. And then psychologist Dr. Grant Jones is also going to be sharing with us as well. And we're going to be having a 3-part series, which we'll be putting on our events page on the Institute for Ministerial Wholeness website. And so we'll be doing that in the coming weeks, and you can refer to that. But then information for our next webinar for December the 5th at 11 a.m. Central Time is going to be with Matt. That's already up, so you can go to that and you can register for it to make sure you have the Zoom link. And as with all of our webinars, every one of them, we record them, and then we also then archive them into the events site. So you can go to the tab events and it'll drop down and you'll see archives, and you can go and you can listen to all the previous webinars that we have done since the Institute started approximately in November of last year. So feel free to access everything that we've done on webinars. Another thing that we're doing is that we're taking the webinars and we're going to be going beyond that, and we're starting a podcast with the Institute for Ministerial Wholeness. So everything is going to be in podcast form as well. That's already being worked on, and we'll be launching that in 2025, if not sooner. And so with that, I want to say thank you to Pastor Matt Thomas of Solid Rock Church in Springfield, Missouri. Just a wonderful church, and so excited for what the Lord is doing there through Matt's ministry and the blessing that he's been to us. So thank you, Matt, for your time today. And thank all of you for joining us. And for those of you that have joined us later on through watching this through the archives of the webinars, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. And Matt, why don't you just give us your email address in case anybody wants to write you directly?
Yeah, it's Matt, M-A-T-T, at solidrocksgf.org.
Okay, very good. And so with that, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you on December the 5th pass the word around, and we'd love to see more of your friends join us as well. So thank you very much. God bless you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. Thank
And
you all.
Mark.
Welcome.